So book three, this one would have been really fun to do in class. Um, so right at the end of book two, right? They've had the Ringit Gyges case, right? And this problem that's going to be there for the rest of the book has been set up, right? Why should somebody care about justice? It sure looks like doing the unjust thing is going to lead to more happiness and success. If anything, the value of justice comes from the reputation tied to it, right? The instrumental value of being seen as a just person. So, what is there to speak for justice? Where's the inherent value of justice, right? And of course, Socrates is going to take on that challenge. And he says, but I got to explain what a just state is like before we can really get back to like a just person. So he's going to give a model of what a just city state looks like. So you think this next book, that's be what you'd be talking about is, well, what does the state look like? And they take this aside on poetry and art and education, right? And so they're talking about so in this book they're having a discussion about what kind of art would be preferred in a just city and how should we educate our leaders and our children. And then they give this famous myth of the metals or the noble lie, and they end it there. And then in the fourth book, they're going to come back to this issue. Okay, well, what does the just state look like? But so what's going on here is a little aside, but really it's about Plato's got this view that in a just state, you're going to spend a lot of time looking at the art your citizens absorb, and you're going to spend a lot of time looking at the education they have, right? So which is really like he's looking at education as a kind of indoctrination, I think in a lot of ways, training people in like the kind of noble myth that your state's going to have. And so a lot of this you can see as a discussion of kind of propaganda and stuff as well, but there's a lot of really cool stuff here. But this would have been more interesting in the class. But anyways, so he starts with this discussion of poetry, right? And Plato, so Socrates, has a problem really with with Homer's poems, right? And Homer, for those of you who haven't read him, right? Homer's of course the Odyssey and the Iliad, right? So the great Greek epic poems, right, about the Peloponnesian War, and then about the the you know the yeah, and Homer's Odyssey, right? Homer's trip home after the war, right? So in these poems discussing them, right? Plato notes that art's incredibly powerful, right? And a wise city, a wise rulers will pay attention to these things. He thinks our art shapes how we think about ourselves. It shapes how we think about reality. And he thinks in a just society, what we would want out of our art is we'd want to encourage certain kinds of art, and we'd want to restrict others. So he's got this, really clear idea of censorship. The thought here, I guess, is that he wants citizens to think about themselves a certain way. He doesn't want people to, be free in the way a liberal democracy today might think about a citizen, right? He wants the citizens to be trained to be a just citizen, to do their role as part of the city. And he wants the leaders to see themselves a certain way and see leadership a certain way. So he wants a very specific kind of education and training for people in the city. And he says art has this kind of power, right? And so we should pay attention to it. It's not something to be just left idle. We should understand it and what it does to us and how it can be used, right? And so he looks at the Homeric poems and he says there's a lot that's not that he really doesn't like here, right? And I mean, one of the reasons he's looking at these is because these would be just incredibly popular, right? I mean, and they still are, right? These are great epic works that everybody should spend some time reading. But to his contemporaries, these would have been the huge, just huge works of art, right? And he says, one of the things he really dislikes about the Odyssey is that it portrays Achilles in the underworld, very much regretting the fact that he is dead and lamenting the life he has lost, right? And he thinks that, well, what that teaches to Odysseus is that death is something to be feared. And he thinks that's not the kind of lesson that we should be trying to teach. We should be trying to teach our citizens, particularly our warriors, right? That they need not fear death. But that's exactly what gets said in this poem, right? So for Plato, that's I guess an offensive idea, and it's an offensive thing to him to teach, right? So I guess you think of a warrior society, right, or or just wanting to raise children to be patriotic and to be willing to die for the state or something like that. That's what he wants, right? He wants you know young young men, right, to be raised so that they're willing to go out and they're willing to die for the city state, right? And he thinks that what's going on wrong in the Odyssey is that it's saying, hey, look, I was once a great warrior, says Achilles, and I died in battle, right? And now here I am in the underworld, and I'd rather be a serf. I'd rather be a slave on land of a poor man than rule over all the dead. So this is horrible. I wish I wouldn't have, been so ready to throw my life away, right? And so the lesson there is we should fear death is worse than being a slave. So he finds that a dangerous lesson, right? Instead, what we should have is the lesson of Socrates, right? Socrates, nobly goes to his death, right? In, the works we looked at previously in the course, right? He's willing to die for his convictions. Plato, that's the lesson that I think he wants taught in poetry, because again, he wants to train young men to not to fear death, but to be courageous and choose death in battle when necessary. So that's his first problem with poetry here. The other problem again he has with Homer is the gods are portrayed as backstabbing and engaged in politics with each other and fickle and full of vices and corrupt. And it makes for great drama in the Odyssey and the Iliad. But again, his thought here is this is not the kind of role models we want for our children, right? He's concerned that these are our heroes, right? And so I put a bunch of I think modern day kind of flawed heroes on the slide for the same kind of reason, right? He doesn't want the heroes to be flawed. He doesn't want them to lack virtue. He doesn't want them to be anti-heroes. He wants them to be perfect and virtuous, to be aspired to. So the question here is, well, how should we portray our heroes and our gods in our arts? If we're wanting to raise a certain kind of child, or a certain kind of citizen, I guess, right? He wants to indoctrinate them. He wants to feed them a certain kind of propaganda, right? That inspires in them virtuous character, right? And one of the reasons for this is the view that he has of morality, right? He's got this virtue ethics where he thinks the virtues are acquired not by reason. They're learned by habit. They're learned by doing over and over again and practicing and imitating. Same sort of thing as brushing your teeth or working out, right? You can understand, that you ought to do something like that, right? You go, I get it. My teeth are gonna rot and decay if I don't brush them, so I better do that, right? But understanding that concept is not the same thing as kind of just being the kind of person that brushes your teeth, right? You acquire a habit like that. You require good hygiene not by understanding it intellectually, but by just doing it. And he thinks the same thing about morality. He thinks morality is not something we gain by reason. It's something we gain through imitation and just doing it over and over again. If you behave in the right kinds of ways, you will learn. You will cultivate the habits of having a virtuous character. And he says, no, given that morality kind of works that way, there's a really core role for education to play for us. It needs to portray lives and heroes and role models who live their lives the way we should imitate, right? And because that's what it'll instill in young children, he thinks. So we need their heroes not to be flawed, but to be perfect pillars of virtue and character. And so we want them to be like Superman and Wonder Woman, not the kind of flawed heroes of the boys or something like that. And very much, that's how he wants the gods portrayed. They're not portrayed like that in Homer's Odyssey, so he thinks that the works are fatally flawed, right? And not the kind of things we should be using to train our children or educate our children on. And after that, he goes into the other kind of arts, right? So he talks about music, he talks about art and architecture, and then he'll talk about what kind of education in general our citizens should have if we want to raise them to succeed in a just state. He thinks, and this has been fun to listen to a bunch of these in class. He thinks when it comes to music, there's a bunch of different modes of music, a bunch of different kinds of music. He thinks the two best kinds of music for again the citizens in the kind of state he wants would be music in the Phrygian scale and music in the Dorian scale. And the reason for this, so the Phrygian scale is kind of very dark music, right? It's very aggressive in a way. It's got this kind of mysterious tone. So Jaws, the Jaws theme, the shark there, that doo 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 doo, that is that'd be Phrygian, right? Or a lot of metal music, or a lot of industrial, a lot of really kind of hard music use that kind of a scale. And I guess what he's thinking, because what he thinks listening to that kind of music will do is it will develop courage, right? So maybe that's why he's got that particular mode in mind, is that it's very aggressive music, I guess. And so the kind of person who would listen to it a lot, he thinks will become a courageous individual. The other one is a Dorian scale, which to me is always sounded sort of mystical and romantic in that romantic in a kind of eerie, mystical way. I, I guess what he's thinking there, so he thinks it will develop temperance, right? You know, um, character where you don't indulge in excess, and you're temperate, right? You abstain when necessary. I want to use the word you use, a stoic life, but that's not the word that Plato or Socrates would use. But I guess the reason the Dorian scale is preferred there by him is exactly that. Is it'll I guess it leads to calmness and a meditative, reflective kind of existence, right? And so that's what he wants again for his guardians, his leaders of his city, right? Is to have courage, to have the virtues. And so he's like the kinds of music they should be exposed to and allowed to listen to is the kind that'll cultivate these virtues, right? And so he's going through art, all these kind of ways, because again, he wants a kind of, and he wouldn't call it indoctrination, but he wants, a certain kind of propaganda and an indoctrination right from the get-go so that citizens develop the kind of character traits that he thinks are worth having. Same thing with art. We heard this when Donald Trump was going through his executive orders he signed when he got when he started, like, right, when he went through and signed like 50 executive orders. One of them was just about making the Capitol beautiful. Socrates has that in mind here, right? He wants the guardians to grow up amongst beauty, right? And so he doesn't want them to be looking at moral images of moral deformity and perversion, and because he thinks being surrounded by art of that sort will have the same kind of effect on you. It'll corrupt you, and it'll fester in your soul. So what he wants to do is he wants his guardians to grow up in again an educational environment where they're surrounded by beauty and grace, and for the youth to dwell in a land of health, right? Amidst this kind of, yeah, sort of perfect, beautiful, in a very classical way, right? So that's the kind of art that should be encouraged. So very much the world we create for ourselves, the art we give ourselves, the music, the literature we give ourselves shapes who we are as people, and the virtues and character that we cultivate, right? At least that's what Plato thinks. And so he thinks our children and our future leaders should have a very specific kind of education where they're exposed to the kinds of art we want them to, that will enable them to cultivate the kind of character we want them to have. Then he goes through additional parts of the kind of education that he wants for them. And he says, physical education, incredibly important. A healthy mind requires a healthy body. So we should have our guardians, you know, making sure that they have an education that is full of physical activity and cultivating their physical health, but in a temperate way. We don't want to go to excess. He says too much effort and time spent on cultivating your physical body leads you to neglect your mind, and you become an uncivil, boorish brute, right? So he thinks, again, moderate, right? You want to be concerned with cultivating your mind just as much as you want to be cultivating your physical beauty. He thinks one of the worst kinds of vicious people, so people that are lacking in virtue and just are full of vice, and then he condemns the slothful person, right? He thinks to be slothful and lazy and generally unhealthy is to to fail to is to waste your life, right, and to waste your potential. And he says like our doctors really shouldn't bother treating people like that. If they don't care about themselves, they don't have any worth either, right? Yeah, a very different view than the world we live in today. So that's the kind of education he wants for people, right? Then the other thing that we should talk about here is two things. We should talk about the noble myth, and then we should talk about how the guardian should live, right? So let's go to the noble myth. So we've gone through the education, we've gone through his views on art. Other things going on in this chapter is he thinks that in a well-ordered state, citizens will have been educated and they'll have been indoctrinated and they'll be raised to think to understand who they are and their role in the city state, and to accept that and to embrace it and to do well in it. So they'll have cultivated the virtues that allow them to do well at what they're supposed to be doing, right? And to play their role in life well. Sorry, I just said well like 20 times in a row. And he thinks to get people there, what we should do is tell this propaganda, this myth, this story of our culture that will get people to appreciate their lot in life, right? So he thinks what we should do with our education system is our leaders for our just city should be selected from the class of the guardians, right? So these are sort of our best and brightest in some way. They need to be older, stronger, wiser, and unwilling to do anything than what is advantageous to the city, right? So this isn't a rule by like an elite class of people that have worked their way up. These are people that are supposed to be, in some sense, the best of us, right? They're wiser and they're stronger than us. So these are, I guess, our best students. But they're also people that really importantly have the virtues, right? These are people that they're not acting out of self-interest. Again, he's very much an idealist. They're not acting to benefit themselves. What they want, what they're most concerned with is the advantage of all of us, the advantages of the city. And those are the kind of people we want to get into that role of leader, right? And so then what we want and what we need to do is we need to tell citizens a story that they should believe as like a gospel truth about the world in order for them to accept their lot in life. So the guardians are a certain type of people. The guardians are strongest or wisest, and they're the people that most importantly put themselves before the city. And then the others are going to have a different lot in life. And so they need to appreciate who and what they are, I guess. And so he makes this analogy with different kinds of metals. And each person has, I guess, at their core, on his view, a precious metal inside them. Those suited to be leaders, right? Again, the guardians, they have the metal of gold. They have a golden soul. Those that are meant to be the ruler should be gold. Those meant to be soldiers have silver, right? And those suited for farming and the crafts and the trades have a bronze soul. That doesn't mean that they're lesser. What he thinks is they have different roles in the city, right? And in book 4, he's going to talk about the different roles. He's very much a class and a caste-based society that he's building. But importantly, the idea here is we're all suited for a specific role in the just city, and we should be trained up into and encouraged to see ourselves as fulfilling that role and wanting to fill that role. And he's going to think if you do that and people are like, I'm a soldier, that's what I'm going to do is I'm going to soldier. I'm a leader, that's what I'm going to do, I'm going to lead. Or, I'm a craftsman, I'm a tradesman, that's what I'm going to do. And you stay in your lane, he thinks the world will be a better place. So that's what he's building towards. So he's got this myth to encourage people to see themselves that way. Now, one of the big problems in the model that he's built, right, which is it very easily lends itself to corruption, right? If you've got corrupt rulers in a model like this, where they've sort of been built up as a separate caste, and they're trying to better themselves and get privileges for themselves, it would be very very easy to end up with a system where your elites are exploiting everybody else. One of the things that he thinks is really important for a just city is the people that are the guardians, the people that are the leaders. They need to live very much a minimalist life, right? They need to, they should be living for the city. They should be living for the benefit of everybody else. They shouldn't be allowed to have private property, he thinks. They shouldn't get privacy. They'll receive what they need from the city via taxation of the other classes, but they should live communally and they should have common messes, he thinks, right? So they should have a life where they don't have a lot of luxury and benefit, and that encourages modesty, that encourages them not to exploit the others. And they don't need it on his model because that's not their purpose or their lot in life. So that's the third book. We'll take up the fourth one next time. Thanks.